let's go ahead and get started. The first one that I've got here is a process demonstration that I call the VIN database service. The purpose of the demonstration is to show that we provide a codeless alternative to creating useful web services or APIs easily in a fraction of the time that would be required to do the same hand-coded approach or using a competitor's tool. The slide build will show how real-time can create a working web service wrapper around a JDBC-capable database and other data sources and publish it to the cloud in a matter of minutes. The audience for this one is very generic. You know, they don't need to have Salesforce for this particular demo to be relevant to them. And in fact, it's not until the second part where we start to get into the guides that there would be a Salesforce component. So let's start with the purpose of this and where the data lives today. I want to show you real quick. I've set up a Microsoft Azure database. And, you know, just like any other JDBC-capable database, it's going to have tables, and the tables are going to have fields, and there's going to be data in it. You can see that I've got a number of different tables in here. The one we're going to be working with, the one that we want to expose as a web service, as a custom web service, is this VIN data table. So if I pop into it, what it does is it basically has the year, make, and model of a given vehicle identification number or VIN number. So somebody would put in the VIN, and then they want to get back the make, model, and year, and they want to be able to do this in an open and web services-based way. And so to get that done, we're going to go ahead and show how easy it is to not only just connect to the database, but then to start utilizing that connection to quickly build a web service. And so for that, we're going to go over and we're going to go into informaticacloud.com. So from logging into informaticacloud.com, as you know, to access the real-time functionality, or the process designer as it's called, you go to the design menu and then services and processes. This will bring up the Informatica process designer, where you will have multiple elements that all come together to create, you know, useful web services, and even the ability to create user interfaces to take human input as part of your process. And so what we're going to start with is we've got to connect to this particular database. And the database, and getting into a database is a very simple thing to do with our tool. Really all it requires is for you to have a connection string, which I'm just going to go ahead and grab right here from my little Azure tool. We're just going to go ahead and grab, we don't even need to get the username and password into our string. We'll just grab this component, and we'll start in our system by creating quickly a connection to this database. So to do that, you can see we have a number of connections set up in this environment to various databases and web services. We're going to create this connection to our database just by going to New, and we're going to go into Connection. First thing that you'll need to do is just select the connection type. We've got a number of default connection types, as well as ones that are provided by the various APIs that we're consuming inside Informatica Cloud Real-Time. But this is just going to be a JDBC generic type connection, and all we'll need to get this done is a username, password, and the connection string. So we're going to go ahead and call this one just real quickly. We'll call it the Azure DB. Give it a nice simple name. We're going to tell it what secure agent we'd like it to run on. You can see there's multiple secure agents or runtime environments that have been set up in this particular environment. We've got a particular one that we're using for our real-time. That's where we keep all the jar files that have the JDBC drivers, and so we're just going to select this one particular agent. Since the database itself is in the cloud, it doesn't really matter so much which secure agent you select, because all it needs is the driver. It does become more important for MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, because the same concept works just fine for on-premise databases as well as ones that are out in the cloud. So we're going to take that connection URL that I had, drop it in here. We're going to tell the system where we've placed the jar file that we have for the SQL Server. And I just have it in a little folder on our secure agent. It's going to be the DBO schema, as is common for Microsoft. And then we'll just provide a username and password. And with all that information, we could go ahead and test just to make sure that it's going to provide a connection. Oh, I need to make sure that I've got my correct password here. All right, we're good to go. So, with the correct username and password, you'll be able to create this connection. So we're just going to go ahead and save it and publish the connection. And now this connection becomes available for read-write activities, depending on the access of the user that we've provided. In addition to using it inside our guides and processes, you could also tell our system whether you'd like to have this particular connection OData enabled, which would expose an OData service URL that can be used inside of Salesforce Lightning Connect to give access to external objects. But for this, we're going to show how all this can be done without even needing to license Lightning Connect or any of that additional things on the Salesforce side in order to expose the data. So now that we've published this particular connection, you can see all of our various tables there. There's the VIN data that we're going to be working with. So now we've got this connection to the database. What are we going to do with it? We're going to design a process around this particular action. And the first step that we're going to go through, and you'll be able to see in my, my demo details here, we're going to go through a couple iterations. First, we're going to go ahead and do a service that provides a lookup. Return, we receive the VIN, return make, model, and year. And then we're going to do a version that actually allows an upsert style activity. So you can take in the input and create a new row in the database. And for the third iteration, we're actually going to do a composite service that takes our database info and combines it with some city and highway mileage data that we're going to get from the Edmunds vehicle service and show how all this can be done very rapidly in the system. So now that we've got our Azure database published and ready to go, what we would do is we'd go ahead and we'll create a new process. This is generally where I'd pause and ask if there are any questions so far, but I'm going to go ahead and push ahead for the purposes of this demonstration. When you create a process, the first most important thing you would do is give it a name. We're going to leave this to just be applies to any, since we're just going to expose an open web service that will be able to be called by any other application or methods. To keep these things simple, we're just going to make this a public web service. We do support WS Basic Authentication to secure any endpoints that you publish with our service. Now, when it comes to defining a process, really it's about getting the inputs and the outputs that you desire. We know for our particular service that we're going to take in an input, and it's going to be that vehicle identification number. So first we'll create an input field, and we're just going to call this something simple like in VIN. I'm just putting a little in front of it so I can, sort, keep all my variables straight. I know this is going to be an input field. It's just going to be a simple text input, and that's all that'll be necessary there. And now we're going to define a couple output fields here. So first one would be, let's have a field where we can send back some kind of message like success, failure, or some notes about that particular, how the service performed. So we just have a message. And then, of course, we need to have an output field for the year, make, and model that we want to return. So we're just going to go ahead and put out make, out model, and out year. And then to give us access to the database, we're going to use that connection that we had just established previously to create an object that represents a row in that database. And so I'm just going to create this little, it's going to be called my database VIN data. And what you do to let the system know that this is a database connection and that it should use those credentials and all the things that you provided in order to give access to the data is you just tell it that it's an object of that type as your database and then the table that we're going to be working with. So in this case, it's the VIN data table. So we've got a little object here that will represent that database connection that we have. So we'll go ahead and hit OK, and we're good to get started. The very first step we're going to have in our process, well, we're going to go ahead and make this in-VIN field required because the process is not going to be useful without this input VIN. So we'll make that a required field, and that way the system automatically returns an error if the required parameter is not submitted. And in this initial step, we're going to do an assignment. We use assignments to populate values on records, to hold temporary bits of information that will be used later in the process, and we also use assignments in order to populate our database objects based on whatever criteria, whether it be an input field or a constant. So we're going to just assign to this DB VIN data that we have we're going to tell it that we're going to use a query because we want to go ahead and get the row back that has the VIN number that matches it. I can show you back in our database here. We've got VIN number, and then we're going to expect vehicle make, model, and year back. So we're going to just query based on this VIN number. It's unique and a primary key for this particular database. And we have this nice tool for adding conditions for the query, where if you go add condition, it understands that the DB VIN data is an object that represents that table. And so here you see all the different fields that exist in that object. The one that we're going to query against in our criteria is the VIN. And then we're going to go ahead and say where the VIN equals a field that we have, in this case, the input VIN. So it's going to go and say, take in the VIN that was sent in as parameter and go try to find a row where it matches the VIN in the database. And that's all there is to establishing that connection. And we'll just go ahead and say assign database object from input. So that was relatively easy. Now we want to make sure that we actually got some data there. So we provide a simple means to verify the results of that call with a data decision. We would put a data decision step in place here, and you can use data decisions for a number of things. You can determine whether or not an object was populated, or you could actually say, hey, I only want to see VIN data where if the row ID is above a certain level, the criteria can be on an individual value, or whether or not you actually got results back. And that's what we're going to do in this circumstance. We're just going to put the data decision on the DB VIN data, and we'll give it a friendly name like VIN found in DB. And if the VIN was not found, we're going to have an error path, and we'll just simply use an assignment step to populate our out message with some values like, let's say, failure. And then we can just tell them VIN not found. We could even include the VIN number that was input as part of the output message. We can insert a field of any type into this space here. We're just going to drop the in VIN in there, so it'll be included in our output message. And that's all there is to it. We'll just say assign failure to out message. And in this circumstance, we're just going to go ahead and end the process. So the type of step would be an end. We can actually define, if you would prefer to send back an HTTP status other than 200, you could throw back an error status. In this case, because the process ran successfully, it's just the VIN wasn't found, we're going to send back a standard HTTP 200 status. This is going to be the end of our process, and that'll be all there is to it. And let's say end error. I'll just give it a name so we can keep track of these things. And so you can see that that particular path terminates. Now, if we did find the VIN number, getting the data that we want to the output is as simple as using another assignment step. We pull in assignment, and then we have those three fields that we were going to output. That's the out make, the out model, and out year. And all you have to do to populate those values is go ahead and say that my database record I have, the DB VIN data, I'd like to get, first of all, the vehicle make from DB VIN data. And then I would like to get the vehicle model. And then I would like to get the vehicle year. So we're just going to say assign output values from DB. And then we'll go ahead and populate the message while we're here. We'll say out message, and we'll give it something friendly like success, VIN found, and then we'll also include the VIN number in this output message. And at that point, we're quite literally done with the creation of this process. I can just go ahead. There's our two paths. If it found the information, it's going to send it back. If it doesn't, it's going to send back an error message. And so using our tool, all you'll have to do to expose this web service to other applications and users is you would save and publish. You'll see here in our processes list we've got a new VIN lookup process. When you publish a process, you're provided with a web service URL that you can use to make that call out. And so just to show you how this piece works, we're going to use the advanced REST client. It's a little tool that allows you to simulate web service calls. So we're going to go ahead and take this service URL. We're going to fire up the advanced REST client here. Let's clear this out. We'll drop our URL right there in that spot. And then all we have to do is tell it that we're going to send in this JSON payload, and then we're just going to construct a very simple JSON payload along these lines. I'm going to go ahead and say we got our in VIN. That was our input parameter. And then I'm just going to put some garbage in here right now to see how our particular path will function. And then I'll go ahead and close the payload. This is going to be a post type action, and so this is exactly how an application would call this particular web service. So the expectation here, yep, there you go, failure, VIN not found. So we've got a live web service, and it was able to determine that we didn't have a match for 1, 2, 3, 4, not too much of a surprise. What we can do here is we can grab, let's just grab this known VIN here and feed it into our service once again. So given this particular input, the web service responds with a success and returns the make, model, and year. So in the matter of time that since we started this demo and now, we've successfully taken a database, whether it be on the cloud or on-premise, put a connection around it, and then utilize that connection to publish a functional web service that does a lookup on that information and exposes the data within in a controlled fashion, in a services-oriented fashion to your various consumers. So that's one example, and that's a kind of a read-only example. You can actually also use our services to perform more robust actions, things like upserts, which would be kind of a combination between an insert and an update. And I'll just kind of scroll through here. This one's going to take in a VIN as well, and it's also going to take in a make, model, and year. And with that information, it's going to go ahead and create that row in the database if it doesn't find the VIN. If it does find the VIN, it's going to go ahead and update the existing data using the input parameters, and you'll be able to see all that happen in the database. So let's go ahead and show you how this VIN upsert process would work. We're going to go ahead and create a new process here. We're going to give it a good friendly name like VIN upsert. We're going to do the same anonymous access, and then we're going to set up a few fields. And now the setup for this is going to be very similar to the process we've just done, except it's going to have a few more inputs that we're going to need to make sure that the year, make, and model are provided in this circumstances. So we've got the in VIN. That's of course very important because that's the primary key for our database. And now we're going to add just a couple additional fields in make, in model, and in year. And now for our output, we're going to have an output. We're going to need an output message, just like we had before, to let folks know how things worked. And then what we'll also output is the database row ID of either the newly created row or perhaps the existing one if we were just doing, if it detected that that ID already existed. So we're just going to call the out DB ID. And then we're going to use the exact same temporary field as we did in our lookup option, which is just going to be an object as your database VIN data. And we'll just give it the same kind of name, DB VIN data. And we're ready to go. Now this upsert process starts exactly like the previous one. We're going to go ahead and in our first step, we're going to go and look for a row in our database that matches the VIN that we put in. So we're going to assign to the DB VIN data. We're going to use this query, add the condition where the in VIN equals the VIN. And then in the next step, we're going to apply a data decision, but in this case, it's going to be for a slightly different reason. It's the same decision. It's going to determine whether or not there's a value that matches the VIN that we've passed in VIN data. But the scenario here is that if it doesn't find the record, then it should go ahead and create that record in our database. And so that's simply done using Informatica Cloud real-time with what we call a create step. You just tell it that it's going to be a create step. It prompts you for what type of object you're going to create. In this case, we're going to go to an Azure database. You can see these can be used to create various Salesforce objects or other databases as necessary, as well as the ability to do this in over certain APIs. But we're going to select the Azure database here, and we're going to create a VIN data row because there wasn't one found matching our VIN. You can see it knows all the fields that it would be necessary to create one of these. The only one that's technically required in the database is VIN, so that appears by default and automatically. We're going to populate the VIN with the in-VIN, of course. And then we're going to also populate a couple additional fields on VIN data. And the only options we have here are fields that exist in VIN data. We're going to go ahead and populate the vehicle make, vehicle model, and vehicle year. And we're going to do that just from our input parameters. In this case, the in make, in model, and in year. Pretty straightforward. This is going to create the record that we need in that particular database. And then after we've created it, what we're going to do is we're just going to return our output values. And the out message is going to go ahead and we're going to populate that, and we're going to say new VIN row created. And we'll just drop the VIN number in here again. And then we're going to assign the out database ID, that row identifier for our database as well. In this case, we're going to use a field, and we're going to tell the system that we want to work off of the created record. And you'll see that we actually have a new option here after the create step to work with the created VIN data record. And so I'm going to just grab in this created VIN data record. I'm going to grab its row ID, and that's all that's going to be returned here. And we can just say, that's that. We don't need any more steps. Now, because this is an upsert, if it does find a match for that VIN, it's going to update the year, make, and model based on the input parameters. So rather than doing a create step, we're going to use an assignment again. We're going to go ahead and update the fields in DB VIN data that match parameters that were put in. So we would just go into our fields list, and we're going to dig into this DB VIN data that we were able to populate with our query and grab the make, the model, and year. And we're going to populate those from our input parameters. So what you're seeing here is a codeless alternative to the type of activities that are common in businesses but often take multiple teams of developer resources and a lot of release management and potentially opening up new holes in the firewall to set up. We've not had to reach out and do any infrastructure type activities. We haven't had to put any equipment into a DMZ. All these endpoints are being published in the cloud, and all the work is done just the way you see it using a visual designer. So we're going to go ahead and update the existing record, and then we'll just go ahead and say in our output message here, this is existing VIN row updated. Pardon. And then we'll just drop the VIN number in here. And then we'll also set the database out ID, and we're going to set that from the existing record, DB VIN data row ID. And then there we are. So we've now completed this particular upsert process, and we can go ahead and see it in action by just simply saving, publishing, and going to grab our particular service URL here. There's my VIN upsert process. There's the service URL for VIN upsert. We'll take that and we'll go to that REST client that we had open before. We'll go ahead and clear out everything and drop in the new URL for VIN upsert. And then we would go ahead and construct the payload in the same way. I've got one saved here for an example input payload. Just go ahead and drop it in here. You can see that we had our INVIN, that's the vehicle identification number, and then the make, model, and year. And the goal of this is if this record does not exist in the system, it should be created, and if it does, it should update what's there. So I'm going to change this around. I'm going to set this 2000 for now, and then we're going to go ahead and make this web service call out. All right, so there, as expected, there's the new VIN row created. There's the information there and what the database row ID is. And just to verify that everything worked as expected, we could actually go and inspect our data here. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. It ends there right now, this row. If I refresh it, we'll be able to scroll down and see at the bottom, there's our new row with the Cadillac SDS. So we've actually created that row in the database based on this information. And now, if there was a future callback made with this exact VIN, we can go ahead and say, well, we actually need to just update the year on this. It really was a 2005. And so in this scenario, it will tell us the existing VIN row was updated and also give us our database output. And you can see the execution of a lot of these processes using Informatica Cloud's tools, such as the Service and Process Console. This is accessible from inside the Informatica Cloud interface under Monitoring. And you could actually go and take a look and inspect the execution of any of the processes that have been running in your environment. You can see that there's been many run historically. And we'll go ahead and see, okay, well, there's my couple calls to VIN upsert and VIN lookup. Just to see how this went, let's click in here. And you can see the actual execution path and what was done for this particular process. So this is when we first created it, of course. So it wasn't found, and it went ahead and created that record. When we called it the second time, the same process followed a separate execution path based on the logic that we were able to include in the system to successfully do this upsert action. So there's that upsert process. And so we've shown how we can easily interact with the database in a read-write fashion. This would be generally part of a larger business process. And so when we start to talk about this being part of the larger business process, we need to worry about, if you're on the phone with the customer, how does this actual interaction occur? Our tooling, and specifically when we talk about the use of our guides that can actually live inside of Salesforce.com, there's the ability to take user input, associate it to Salesforce records, and create new Salesforce records and do any number of actions. And so that's the example that we're going to move on to next. No, I apologize. We had one more piece of the puzzle that I was going to show you on this service because we're going to reuse all of it in a little bit. I got a little ahead of myself. We've got this database service, but now really what our tool is about is it's not just a single service and a single result. It's about the concept of orchestration and the ability to produce composite data that can take information from your data sources, multiple data sources potentially, and also reach out to various APIs to enrich the data as that comes across. And this can be done very simply in our tool, and we can show you how simple it is by actually putting together one of these type of connections literally from scratch. This is how you would interact with a particular REST web service. In this case, we're going to use the Edmunds vehicle service. This is it's a web service that provides all kinds of information about the car. In this particular case, we're going to be interested in the gas mileage of this vehicle because we're going to want to return the year, make, and model, and we also need to know the city and highway miles per gallon. Well, the city and highway miles per gallon is not stored in our database. It's going to actually be stored off in a service connector, and these service connectors can be constructed very rapidly using our particular tooling. So we'll show you how that's done. Once again, so that there's nothing up our sleeves, you can put this API connector together from scratch, and you can do it for any of your existing APIs or new ones that are developed. We're going to create a service connector. We're going to give it a simple name like Edmunds Service Connector. One thing that it's going to need in order to work is an API key. It's a common authentication mechanism for various web services out there. So we're just going to create a little property called myAPI key. And then I just happen to have one handy. And once again, this is showing exactly, this is starting from nothing, how easy it is to interact with this particular web service. So we're going to give it that API key. We're going to make that a required element. And then we're going to set up a very simple action. And this action is just going to, it's going to be called get vehicle info. You could decide whether or not you actually want this to fault on a given error or try to return the error message back to you. That's what we're going to do in this particular circumstance. We're just going to get a vehicle information. The input that we're going to provide is a vehicle identifier or vehicle ID, which is basically the VIN number. This is going to be a required piece of input. And then all you'll need to do is actually just grab the URL endpoint of the web service and drop it into our codeless connector to get this configured. So we'll just drop the URL in here. You can see this is the call out to the Edmunds service. And all we're doing is taking our input parameter, the vehicle ID, and just putting it at the end of the URL. Additionally, to make a call to the service, of course, you need to include that API key. So you just put that in as another parameter, and you tell it you want it to state the connection property, my API key. And then we also need to provide a format parameter. This is specified in their API documentation. So we're just going to send them a JSON payload. And so with this information, if I were to go ahead and say grab, we'll go ahead and use our new VIN number that we have here and just verify that this is doing what we want it to do. Let's test our web service. Success. There's the URL that was generated. There's the response that came back from the Edmunds service. And now to utilize this information, all we have to do is set up a couple output variables. All right, there's our mileage, highway and city. So we can set that up, and perhaps what other sort of interesting information, maybe the transmission type. This will be information that will return. And getting access to that information is simple as configuring output variables, where we'll just call the one city, call this one highway, and then we'll just call this one transmission. Actually, we'll just call it transmission type. And this is literally just the name that we saw, in our service connector. So I'm going to give this a little bit more of a friendly label in our output. We're just going to put MPG in front of it, MPG, and then we'll just call this one transmission. So now when we make this web service call, you can see it actually just gives us the discrete outputs we want, the city, highway mileage, and the transmission. And so now let's take this API and work it into the process that we built before. This can be done simply. All you have to do is publish the service connector. And then because a service connector can be thought of as more like a template for these web service connections, that you could use different credentials or different access points, different endpoints, we create what we call a specific connection for this, where we select our template, we give it a name, like Edmunds API. And then we just drop that API key that we needed. These fields can all be encrypted as well for security purposes. I'm just going to leave it open for the purpose of the demonstration. We'll save this, and then we'll publish it. And that's all there is to getting access to this API. And so let's pop back into our little VIN lookup process, as we may recall what we had going here. I go back one step. Now, this was our process where we passed in a VIN, and we got back that year, make, and model, right? So now we're going to enhance this particular piece. And just to make sure that it's backward compatible, we'll go ahead and throw an additional process on here. We'll put in enhanced. And we're actually going to use a checkbox type so that it's just going to be a yes or a no that will be accepted in this particular input. So if they put is enhanced yes, then we'll actually make that call and get that enhanced data. And as I said, it could make this backwards compatible for folks that just use the previous version. We're going to include some additional output fields here because, you know, we have year, make, and model. We're going to include an output for the city MPG. We're going to put an output for the highway MPG. And then we'll also include the output for the transmission. So this is the additional data that we would get from this web service call out. So we've added a few more output fields here. And now in our process, we just want to follow the path where, you know, the non-failure path where we actually found that VIN. And so we'll just drop another data decision in here that will check to see if they've decided to use the enhanced mode. If it's yes, then we'll go ahead and do the enhancements. If it's no, it'll just go ahead and run through to the end of the process. But for here, if they want the additional information, we use what we call a service call step. And this is how you would reach out to the action that you've established in that service connector. You go in here, there's our Edmunds API that we published. There's our get vehicle info. Great. You can see that it's going to expect a vehicle ID input, and then it'll give us these three as an output. So we jump over here and we say, all right, the vehicle ID that we're going to send to this web service call is that same InVIN we've been using all along. And that's all that's necessary to make that web service call. We have access to this information, and we can use it to assign the output variables. So here's, you know, our out city MPG and out highway MPG and out transmission. These are the additional fields we wanted to populate. All we need to do is take those values from the service call, MPG city, MPG highway, and the transmission. So those are the additional parameters that we're going to receive back. I'm going to go ahead and let the process permeate at that point. So now, in addition to getting database data, as part of this process, it's going to make a web service call on our behalf, get some additional information, and return back the whole set. And the caller will never have to be the wiser, so to speak. So we'll save our changes to VIN lookup. We'll publish them. And then we'll just go back over to that REST client. And so we're going to use the same URLs we used before because all we did was just update and publish a new version of this process. We're going to go ahead and put in the enhanced is yes. So there's that additional parameter. And then we'll go ahead and submit it. Great. So there's our city mileage. There's the make, model, year. There's the transmission. All the information that we wanted from those multiple services put together in one composite service that was very simple and easy to use. And everything that we constructed here was from scratch, including bringing in the service connector to the Edmunds API. There was nothing that existed that enabled that prior to what you saw be built live before you. And so we're going to go ahead and just hop into our last use case, which is that, as I mentioned before, the guides, the ability to incorporate something along these lines to have a user interface that would actually live in the Salesforce interface. And so to illustrate that, we're going to create a guide that will allow a user to add a vehicle record to a particular account in Salesforce. So if we pop over to Salesforce, you can see here, we've got this guides section where we actually are able to display a number of guides that are specific to particular processes, like adding and validating contacts, cleaning up the records on an account. You can reach out to your ERP and get transactions in real time. These guides can be published dynamically and hidden dynamically based on records on the account as well, something that's not necessarily possible with out-of-box Salesforce. And then you see here we got this vehicle custom object, and that's what we're going to be adding vehicles to the account using this guide. And with the tooling that we have, it's pretty simple to do. We're going to come in here and we're going to create a new guide. Sometimes you have to use the window that you were logged into. There we go. This is where I've been working. Apologize, I let my session expire. All right. So we're going to do a new guide, and we're going to call this guide Add Vehicle to Account. Now, in this circumstance, we are going to set the applies to because we want this to run in the context of a Salesforce account. That gives us the advantage of knowing and having access to all the variables on that record, as well as any related record, as many levels up as you want to go. So we're going to say this is going to apply to a Salesforce account, and that's how we'll make sure that this guide appears on the account page layout. And then we can go ahead and give it a little tag here to help sort things out. All right, VIN service looks like something that we're using. And then we can go ahead and get the guide going. We're going to add one field right off the bat where they're going to input the VIN, because the requests in this circumstance, the customer will have called in and the agent will requested that they add a new vehicle to their account. And so the agent will say, hello, sir, what's your VIN? They'll take in the VIN. They'll get the information from the database. It'll get the information from the web service, and then it will take all that to create the vehicle record in Salesforce, using all the information brought in from the various sources. So we're just going to call the input field new VIN. That's fine. And then we're going to also need that good old database field as well. So VIN data. Once again, at a type objects as your database VIN data. And that's all we'll need to get started. Now, the first step of our guide is going to be very straightforward. We're going to just say, we're going to go ahead and say, please enter VIN to create vehicle record on account. And then we'll drop a nice little picture in here real quick just so that everybody knows what we're up to. There we go. Just kind of have that there. Insert the image. You can do all kinds of things in terms of the styling. We're just going to make this simple just to kind of focus on the speed and efficiency here. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to prompt them for that new VIN field. So they give us the new VIN. Make that not bold. And then we'll just say, call this prompt enter VIN, and then we'll just give the ability for them to continue from here. So there's the first piece. And you can see the guide designer gives us the ability to create what we call screen steps. You can also use screens during create and assignment as well. So we're going to take the VIN that they put in, and we're going to do something similar to what we've done before, where we actually check to see if it exists. And we can reutilize some of our previous work by making a process call, where if we make a call out to that VIN lookup process that we already built, it'll give us all the information we need, including whether or not the VIN actually exists. So let's just not reinvent the wheel and use our existing process. We're going to go ahead and set the in-VIN to be populated from that new VIN field that we just prompted the user for. And then in the next step, we're going to perform a data decision. It's going to check the out message that came back from our process call. And if it starts with success, then great, go down one path. If not, then go down another. If it's not successful, we're just going to tell the user VIN not found. Please re-enter and click try again. So we'll give them a prompt to give them the chance to fix their VIN number here because it wasn't found. And then we'll set up the prompt. Or they can just end the guide right here if they wanted. We can give them as many options as they like. So let's say they just wanted to exit out. So end guide, that's simple. We'll just terminate here. Don't even show the screen. If they wanted to try again, then we just jump back to the assignment step where we do the VIN lookup. Great. Now, if it was found, we're going to go ahead and display those results to the person on the screen. We'll say found in DB, review info below. And we'll just drop the, we want to be able to show the year, make, and model. Make, model. So, and then we're going to grab those fields. There is our out year, out make, and out model. You can see that we're just using the exact same parameters that we would have if we've been calling it from an external. And so this will display the information here. And I'll just say review DB info. Great. And now in the next step, we're going to make that service call to get the enhanced information. There's our Edmunds API, get vehicle info. We're going to feed it from that in VIN. And you can see we have access to all the fields that are on the account right now, just in case that was going to be important for this particular parameter. But we're just going to use the new VIN that we've input. And so it's going to get the vehicle information, and now we'll just go ahead and display that. Vehicle enhanced vehicle info from Edmunds. And we'll just drop a couple fields here, such as city MPG, highway MPG, and transmission. We'll take these fields here. There's MPG city, just as we did before. MPG highway. And transmission. Review API info. And then continue from here. So now that we've got all this enhancement, we're going to go ahead and create that record, but we're still need to prompt for a couple more pieces of information because our vehicle record requires the license plate and the state that it was registered in. So if I tell the system that we want to go ahead and create an object, instead of a database object like we were doing before, we're going to go ahead and create a Salesforce object of type vehicle. There it is. I'm going to prompt us with some of the required fields. There's our the account ID because we want it to be associated with the account. We're going to give it the vehicle identification number. We're going to also populate the year, make, model. Then our city and highway, So we'll just go ahead and say that we're going to use our existing fields for each of these. Combining data together from the database, from the user, and from an API call in order to make this happen. So we'll just use our new VIN as there, and then we'll come back down here and we'll grab the out year, out make, out model, and then we're going to grab our city and highway miles per gallon to use. We also wanted the transmission. And then we're also going to prompt for the registration state and license plate. So we're going to set the transmission from our outputs. And then registration state, we're going to say we want to grit this from the screen. So we're going to just tell it that rather than use a field or fixed content to grab it from the screen, and if we come over to our input screen tab, you can see that it's already prompting us to, those two fields are going to be needed here. So just to wrap this up very quickly, we're going to say enter registration info to create vehicle. And then we're just going to drop the registration state, the license plate, and that's all there is to it here. And then that'll be the end of our guide. We'll just set this thing here to be an end step. We can congratulate the user here, but in this case, we're just going to redirect them, and we're not going to redirect to the current object. We're actually going to go to the vehicle record that we just created, and we're not going to just show the screen. So as soon as they've created the vehicle, it's going to take them directly here. So we'll go ahead and apply, and we've completed our guide. To see this thing in action, we'll go ahead and save it. We'll publish it. And after it's been published, we can come back over to the account record, and if I refresh the screen here, there's our add vehicle to account. So now it's available to end users. We didn't have to do a Salesforce deployment to make that happen. It's available in the space with the context of the Core Care Technologies account. So now we're going to go ahead and do this add vehicle. All right, there's our guide. There's our, our first prompt. We're going to grab this. We're going to grab a VIN number, say this Kia here. Drop it in place. Continue. All right, great. There's the database information that we wanted to see, the year, make, and model, so we can review that as an end user. In the next step, we can display this information to the end user. There's the city and mileage, city and highway miles per gallon, what transmission. And then we're going to go ahead and finish off the creation of this record by including registration state CA, and we'll just call this as info for life. We've got a vanity plate. And we'll go ahead and hit continue. Now, just like that, we've created this new vehicle record. You can see it's got the year, make, and model. It's got the mileage, the transmission, the vehicle identification number, registration, license plate. If we pop back up to the account, you'll see that we have, in fact, created a new record using all this data from external systems that now lives underneath the account. And that's the end of the guide demo. And I do believe that's all the time that we're going to have for today. I do appreciate everybody's patience. The key element here is everything that we have done was absolutely from scratch. There's nothing that had to be pre-assembled in order to make this demo go more smoothly. It's this easy to use.